The evidence against him is overwhelming, Your Honor." The prosecutor's voice rang through the packed courtroom, sharp and deliberate. Victoria Hale stood tall, her confidence unshakable. Across the room, Alex Carter sat at the defense table, hands folded, his expression unreadable. To the jury, to the spectators, to the cameras broadcasting this trial to millions, he already looked guilty. He wasn't here to convince them of his innocence. He was here to destroy the case against him. Judge Judy tapped her gavel once. "Mr. Carter, you're facing serious charges: identity theft, fraud, grand larceny. Do you care to explain why you're sitting in my courtroom today?" Alex exhaled slowly, calm, focused. "Because someone made a mistake." The courtroom stirred. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. A few chuckles from the jury box. Victoria Hale smirked as she adjusted her blazer. She had won dozens of cases like this before. Judge Judy leaned back slightly. "A mistake?" Alex nodded. His fingers tapped lightly on the table. "Yes, Your Honor, and by the time we're done here, you'll see it too." Silence. Judge Judy turned to Victoria Hale. "The prosecution may proceed." Alex leaned back, his expression unreadable. He knew what was coming. The evidence, the witnesses, the reports. The case had been built to bury him. But they didn't realize something. He wasn't here to defend himself. He was here to turn this case upside down. Some trials aren't about guilt or innocence. Some trials expose everything people think they know about justice. Before we go further, do you believe in second chances? Drop your thoughts below, like, subscribe, and keep watching. Because what happens next, it will change everything. Victoria Hale rose from her seat, a practiced smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she approached the jury box, calm, confident, in control. "This is one of the clearest cases of fraud we have ever seen." She turned, gesturing toward Alex Carter, without even looking at him. To her, he wasn't a person. He was a conviction waiting to happen. For 6 weeks, the defendant, Alex Carter, lived a life of luxury using a stolen identity. He stayed in 5-star hotels, ate at the most exclusive restaurants, and rented a Mercedes S-Class, all under someone else's name. She lifted a stack of papers from her desk and held them up. "These aren't allegations. These are facts." She paced slowly, her voice steady, rehearsed. "The prosecution has presented security footage showing the defendant checking into the Avalon Grand Hotel under a stolen credit card. The receipts have his signature. His fingerprints were found on the stolen card. And when police arrived at his hotel suite, they found him still living the high life?" She stopped, turning to face Alex directly for the first time. "The defense would have you believe that this is all a misunderstanding, that this is some elaborate mistake." Her lips curled slightly. "But tell me, Mr. Carter, what kind of mistake puts your name on a receipt?" A small ripple of laughter moved through the courtroom. The jury shifted slightly, their expressions unreadable. Judge Judy didn't react. She simply turned to Alex. "Well, Mr. Carter, what do you have to say for yourself?" The room waited. Alex exhaled slowly. Then, finally, he leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. His voice was calm, controlled. "I have just one question for the prosecution." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." Alex tilted his head slightly. "You said the security footage shows me checking into the Avalon Grand Hotel at 8:37 p.m., correct?" Victoria crossed her arms. "That's right." Alex nodded. "And you said that when police arrived, they found me inside the suite, in possession of the stolen credit card." "Correct." A beat of silence. Then Alex's fingers tapped against the desk, a slow, deliberate rhythm. "That's interesting," he said softly. Victoria's brow furrowed. "What's interesting?" Alex exhaled, sitting back in his chair. Because at 8:37 p.m., when your undeniable security footage shows me checking into the Avalon Grand, his eyes flickered toward the jury, watching them carefully. I was already in police custody. The room froze. A ripple of confusion spread across the jury box. Judge Judy's gaze sharpened. Victoria Hale's smirk disappeared. Alex leaned forward slightly, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Your Honor, I would like to subpoena the original, unaltered security footage from the Avalon Grand Hotel's servers. Judge Judy turned toward the prosecution. Ms. Hale, do you have any objections? Victoria hesitated, a fraction of a second. But in that moment, the entire case shifted. The air inside the courtroom shifted. The certainty that once surrounded the prosecution's case had begun to crack. The security footage, the most damning piece of evidence, was suddenly in question. Judge Judy's gaze didn't waver. She had seen every trick in the book. But this was something else. Victoria Hale's fingers tightened around her folder. She had walked into this courtroom knowing she had already won. But now, for the first time, she was on defense. Judge Judy exhaled sharply. Ms. Hale, the defense has raised a valid concern. If Mr. Carter was already in police custody at 8:22 p.m., then he could not have been checking into a hotel at 8:37 p.m. She turned to the bailiff. Subpoena the original security footage from the Avalon Grand servers. I want a direct chain of custody. No third parties. The bailiff nodded once and left the courtroom. But the tension? It didn't leave with him. Alex Carter leaned back slightly, his expression calm, but his eyes watching Victoria Hale like a chess player waiting for the opponent's next move. Victoria licked her lips. Your Honor, I would like to remind the court that even if there is a discrepancy with the timestamps, that does not erase the other evidence against Mr. Carter. Judge Judy tilted her head slightly. And yet, Ms. Hale, you were the one who called this case airtight. Now your most damning piece of evidence is… What? A small discrepancy? The murmurs in the gallery grew louder. Victoria's posture stiffened. Your Honor, the receipts, the fingerprints, and the defendant's possession of the stolen card. Alex cut her off. Let's talk about that for a second. Judge Judy raised a brow. Go ahead, Mr. Carter. Alex stood, adjusting his stance. His voice was steady, controlled. The prosecution claims that because my fingerprints were on the stolen card, that means I must have used it. He turned, making direct eye contact with the jury. But let's think logically for a moment. He took a step forward. If you walk into a store, pick up an item, examine it, and put it back on the shelf, and someone later steals that item, does that make you guilty of theft? The jury exchanged glances. Someone in the gallery muttered under their breath. Alex continued, his voice growing sharper. The credit card in question was left on a restaurant table along with a bill. I was there with 3 other people. Yes, I picked it up, looked at it, because I thought it had been left behind, then put it back down. He let those words settle. But the prosecution would have you believe that simply touching something means I committed a crime. More murmurs from the gallery. The jury was leaning in now. Victoria Hale flipped through her notes. Your Honor, the forensic report clearly places the defendant's fingerprints on the card. This is not speculation. Alex lifted a hand slightly. Then let's call the forensic analyst to the stand. Let's ask them exactly how that fingerprint analysis was conducted. Judge Judy raised a brow. Ms. Hale, was the forensic expert subpoenaed to testify? Victoria's jaw clenched. She hesitated. That pause. It was louder than words. Judge Judy caught it instantly. She turned to the bailiff. Contact the forensic analyst. I want them here before this trial proceeds any further. The jury was watching closely now. because suddenly the case wasn't just against Alex Carter, it was against the evidence itself. Alex exhaled slowly. He had spent years watching trials, studying prosecutors, understanding their tactics. And there was one thing he knew better than anyone. When a prosecutor starts stalling, when they start hesitating, when they start losing control of their own case, it means they're hiding something. The weight of the courtroom shifted. Everything had started as a simple open and shut case. Fraud, identity theft, undeniable evidence. Now the prosecution's case was falling apart in real time. Judge Judy had ordered the forensic analyst to appear. The jury was no longer leaning toward conviction. They were watching, waiting, questioning. Victoria Hale was losing control, and Alex Carter, he was just getting started. The courtroom door swung open. A man in a white lab coat stepped inside. Dr. Raymond Ellis, lead forensic analyst. The bailiff walked him to the stand. He raised his right hand. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Dr. Ellis hesitated, only for a second. Then he nodded. Judge Judy folded her hands. "Dr. Ellis, you were responsible for analyzing the defendant's fingerprints on the stolen credit card?" "Yes, Your Honor." Alex stepped forward. His voice was sharp, precise. "Dr. Ellis, how were my fingerprints found on the card?" The analyst shifted slightly in his seat. "We recovered prints from multiple surfaces of the card, and your fingerprints were among them." Alex nodded slowly. "And can you confirm for the court," he said, his tone deliberate, "where on the card my fingerprints were found?" The doctor hesitated. Then, quietly, "Only on the edges." Silence. The gallery stirred. The jury leaned forward. Victoria Hale didn't move. Alex turned toward the jury, his voice calm but cutting. "Not on the chip, not on the magnetic strip, not on the numbers." He took a step closer. "Not on any part of the card that would have been needed to actually use it." The jury was no longer just listening. They were realizing. Judge Judy turned to Dr. Ellis. "Did the prosecution ask you to testify before today?" Another hesitation. "No, Your Honor." Alex exhaled sharply. "They didn't call you," he said, his voice like a scalpel, cutting straight through the moment. "Because they didn't want the jury to know that my fingerprints, the only forensic evidence they had, weren't proof of a crime." The courtroom reacted instantly. Gasps, murmurs, a ripple of realization spreading like wildfire. Judge Judy turned toward Victoria Hale. "Ms. Hale, why wasn't this information submitted to the court?" Victoria stayed silent. Alex didn't stop. "And since we're talking about withheld evidence," he continued, his voice sharper now, "let's talk about the security footage." The jury tensed. Alex turned back toward the bailiff. "Has the Avalon Grand Hotel sent us the original, unedited footage yet?" The bailiff nodded, handing over a flash drive. Judge Judy motioned for the court technician to play it. A screen lowered in front of the jury. The uncut footage loaded. The gallery held its breath. The video played. At 8:37 p.m., the hotel lobby was empty. Alex Carter never checked in. The courtroom erupted. Judge Judy slammed her gavel. "Order!" The noise settled, but the damage was done. Victoria Hale was exposed. Judge Judy turned toward her. "Ms. Hale," she said, her voice controlled but dangerous, "do you have an explanation for why false evidence was submitted to this court?" Victoria's throat bobbed. She was out of options. But instead of answering, she did something no one expected. She turned toward Daniel Foster, the head of hotel security, the man who had given her the fake footage. She wasn't going down alone. The moment their eyes met, he knew. And the entire courtroom saw it. Judge Judy's gaze hardened. "Mr. Foster, stand up." Foster didn't move. "Now." He slowly rose to his feet. Alex took a slow breath. He had known something was off from the start. But now he knew exactly how deep this went. Judge Judy exhaled sharply. This trial is no longer just about Mr. Carter. She turned toward the bailiff. Escort Ms. Hale and Mr. Foster to my chambers. We are investigating this immediately. The jury wasn't watching Alex anymore. They were watching the real criminals being escorted out. And just like that, Alex Carter had won. The courtroom was no longer just a place of law. It had become a battlefield where the truth had finally won. Victoria Hale and Daniel Foster had been escorted out, their reputations and careers dangling by a thread. The once unstoppable prosecutor, who had walked into this trial with an air of absolute certainty, was now under investigation herself. Alex Carter? He was still standing. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, watching him carefully. She had seen thousands of defendants, some guilty, some innocent, and some who just knew how to play the system. But this wasn't just another case. She exhaled sharply, then turned toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady, "what we have witnessed here today is a failure of the very system designed to uphold justice. A prosecutor who manipulated evidence, a witness who provided false testimony, and a case that should have never been brought to trial." She shifted her gaze back to Alex. "But despite all that, one thing remains. You, Mr. Carter, were put on trial." The jury watched closely. The gallery held its breath. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, "This case is dismissed." The words rippled through the courtroom like a shockwave. The jury exchanged glances, their duty cut short before they even had a chance to deliberate. The spectators whispered, some in disbelief, some in quiet relief. Alex Carter didn't react right away. Not with a sigh of relief, not with celebration. He simply closed his eyes for a second, letting the moment settle. Judge Judy tapped her gavel once. "Mr. Carter, you're free to go." The weight of the words settled over the room, but Alex already knew. He was never supposed to be here in the first place. The steps outside the courthouse were swarming with reporters. Cameras flashed, microphones were shoved toward him. "Alex, how do you feel knowing you were almost convicted on false evidence? Do you think Victoria Hale will face charges for what she did? What's next for you?" Alex Carter ignored the noise. He wasn't here for a spectacle. He was here because he never should have been here. His mother was waiting for him near the bottom of the steps, arms crossed, eyes filled with something between pride and exhaustion. For a long moment, she just looked at him. Then, finally, she let out a breath. "You scared me half to death." Alex chuckled softly, scratching the back of his head. "Had to take a risk, Ma." She shook her head, but a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "You always were the stubborn one." The cameras kept flashing. The questions kept coming. But Alex? He wasn't paying attention to them anymore. Across the street, Judge Judy stood by her car, watching him. Her posture was different now, not rigid, not amused. Reflective. She had assumed this case would be just another name, another file, another conviction. But now? Now she knew she'd never forget it. Because Alex Carter had done something most people never could. He had made the system look at itself. And for once, it blinked first. Some cases end in a verdict, others leave behind a question. Alex Carter walked free, but how many others never got the chance to? How many people sat in that same courtroom, accused of crimes they didn't commit, with no one to expose the lies hidden in plain sight? Today, justice was served, but not because the system worked, because one man refused to be broken by it. Judge Judy had seen it all, but this case? It was different, because Alex Carter hadn't just won his freedom. He had exposed something deeper. And once you've seen the truth, You can't just look away. So now the question is, what happens next? If this case has opened your eyes, don't just sit back. Hit like, subscribe, and share this story, because next time, it might not be Alex, it might be someone you know.